And thank you, Nell, for joining. I will introduce you now. This is Nell Edgington. She wrote Reinventing Social Change is a book about changing, I feel like changing your mindset in the nonprofit space from scarcity to abundance. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and why. Let me know, why did you write this book?
Yeah,
I think I
yeah.
will.
Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and always love to talk about the book and these topics. So I wrote this book. I have a long career in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. I've worked in the sector for 25 years. In fact, my first job out of college was in Portland. I worked for the Oregon
Okay.
Children's Foundation. It, you know, I have worked in various organizations and then started Social Velocity about 12 years ago. And through all of those different organizations I've worked with, I was frustrated by what I saw as, amazing people with amazing visions for how the world could be a better place, but held back by
Mhm.
various reasons, by, internal things, kind of the way they thought about things, but also restrictions, all kinds of restrictions that are placed on the sector, how money flows and all sorts of other things. So this book is really um, how I feel there is a path out for social change leaders, how they can do things differently, think about things differently, so that ultimately these amazing visions they have for a better world can actually come to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. I had just mentioned to you, of course, we weren't recording yet, but I find for myself it was like a quick read over the weekend, but it's like I have notes all throughout the book, kind of referencing things that stood out to me because I feel like I will myself use it as a resource for years to come,
That's
working with
great.
the space. Um, so do you want to explain sort of what the difference between an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset
Yeah.
is for people?
Yeah. So a scarcity mindset, I think, most folks that work in the social change sector will be very familiar with it because of, as I say in the book, it permeates the sector, and
Mhm.
it's this idea of lack, that there's never enough. There's never enough money, enough volunteers, enough board members, enough time, enough influence, enough power to achieve your mission or to achieve your social change goals. So you just sort of feel that you're held back. You don't have enough. And the alternative is the abundance mindset, which is the idea that there's plenty out there. There's more than enough of all of those things and much, much more if you can shift your worldview. And if you can start to see things in a different way, if you can start to believe things in a different way, and if you can start to move people and resources in a different way.
And it seemed to me, I think, well, how do we do it, right? But it seemed to me on in the beginning of your book is it actually starts with the leader themselves
Yep.
and sort of the way that they approach the world.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you want to tell people about where to start with
Yeah.
that?
So absolutely, I think it starts with the individual, and I wrote this book as sort of help to the sector, but ultimately I wrote it from my own experience and to myself as well, because I think the way that you approach things and the way you think about things is incredibly powerful to the experience that you actually have. So I have a lot of ideas in the book and tips and tricks and things like that, but I guess maybe my favorite is what I think is a really easy thing to start doing, which is using the word yet.
Oh,
So
right.
it's, and there's actually a Sesame Street,
Yeah,
Janelle
we
Monae.
listened to it this morning.
Isn't
It was
it awesome? She
great.
does this song on Sesame Street about the
Right.
power of yet, which is amazing. But the
Hmm.
idea is the word yet has such power because if you take any scarcity based thinking or thought, and so many of them happen in the nonprofit sector, like, we don't have enough money. We don't know how to fundraise. We can't attract the board we need, on and on and on of all of these things that there isn't enough of or we don't have. And you attach the word yet to that sentence, it
Hmm.
then opens up enormous possibility and it
Right.
opens the doors to potential abundance. So if you say, we don't have the board we need yet, or we don't know how to fundraise effectively yet, when you add that word, then you sort of allow the green light to, okay, well, what can we do about that? What might we be able to do? How could we tap into people that we know? How could we find expertise? How could we maybe read some things, or, ask other folks, or what could we do to overcome that? So instead of just closing the door on it and saying, we don't have it, it's scarce, you say, okay, well, we don't have it now, but there's a possibility it exists out there, and we can open ourselves up to that. And just that simple act, you start to see things shift and things start to move, and you start to have things flow to you that maybe weren't before.
Yeah, totally. It reminded me a lot of Amanda Gorman's poem at the inauguration.
Yes.
Like her ending phrase of there is always light if we're only brave enough to see it, if we're only brave enough to be it.
Oh my God, it's so beautiful. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Shot it out of the park.
Yeah.
And I think it's true, and I love that you give a lot of strategies too. So it's not sort of, maybe people put, I think, abundance mindset and manifestation in the like woo woo,
right.
Category.
Yeah.
But yet you actually have to know where you're going. We talk a lot about process in our organization. And if you don't see the goal, I mean, it won't ever come, right?
You're not going to get there.
Right.
If you haven't articulated it. Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely. And speaking of the articulation, and the power of yet felt like that to me. It is one of the strategies that you have, but you're always talking about how words are phrased, like how you rephrase things. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to anything about that. Even like some of, like, you've talked about myths in the book, the overhead myths, and thinking that our nonprofit should be operating with very small amount of their revenue. And so being able to rephrase that and shift. So I think actually I just kind of jumped around lots of different things.
That's fine.
But I don't know if you want to start, because I guess I saw a pattern of it. Change the way, find clarity, change the phrasing. Trying to think of towards the end of the book a lot, you talk also about the language is so important, like give and donate.
Yep.
Kind of means like a charity versus invest. We're making partners.
Yep.
Did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah. And, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge proponent of semantics. Words are words, but really what's more important is sort of the intention behind them, or the fundamental belief behind them. And I find so often that nonprofit leaders feel that they're not worthy. And when they approach a funding, source, a funder, right out of the gate, that relationship is dysfunctional because it's unequal. And I'm not blaming just nonprofit leaders. I think funders often come to that relationship in sort of an unequal way too, right? They'll hold the checkbook, and the grantee or the nonprofit, is asking for money. But if you can transform that relationship, and I fundamentally believe that transformation starts from how each person walks into that room. And so if the nonprofit leader can walk into that room and fundamentally believe that they are equal to that funder, then that starts to create a huge shift in how the two interact, and then how funding flows and all sorts of things. And I'm not being Pollyanna about this. I've seen this happen with my clients so many times, where they've started out a relationship with a funder where they're beholden to the funder, and, oh, thank you so much, and we're overly grateful, and, oh my gosh, we'll do whatever you want. And instead, if they shift that to be very confident and strong in their convictions about how they will use the money, and how important it is, the work that they are doing, how valuable it is, and how the funder can be an equal partner in this, and that there's huge opportunity here. Let's do this work together. Those are all words, but if the intention behind them is, you as a nonprofit leader truly believe that your work has tremendous value, and that your partners are equals in the work, then you can really start to transform that relationship and ultimately transform how much money is flowing to your organization and your work.
Right, right. It's really the bringing in of the energy of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed to me like you've got certainly, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, of like starting with the individual, that they have to find their own joy, make space.
Yeah.
I find for myself that's very tough to do.
It is.
So
It
I've
is.
resonated with the space and the time, and certainly the enoughness, but making it really a daily practice.
Yeah.
And you speak a lot about gratitude for that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um, I really thought it was interesting, the over giving is
Mm.
your like inability to receive.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to speak to that, of like,
Yeah.
where did that come from? Because it kind of hit me. I'm like, yikes, is that? And it was not only just the inability to receive, but it was like the giver wants or needs something from the recipient.
That's right. Yes.
I
And,
was like, oh,
again, I can only write about this stuff because I have lived it. I am
sure.
a diehard overgiver, hopefully a recovering overgiver, right? And so there's two kinds of giving, overgiving and then generous giving. And, Brene Brown talks about this. Psychologists talk about this. I'm not making this stuff up, but I think it's so important in the nonprofit sector because I see it happening. I see overgiving happening all the time. And overgiving ultimately comes from a feeling of not being worthy, not being equal,
Right.
not having enough. I'm not enough. I don't have enough. Therefore, I have to give and hope that something comes back to me. Whereas generous giving is, I'm already more than enough, plenty. I have so much that's overflowing that I am happy to give more. And when I give, it doesn't take anything away from me. And that's where we all, not just the nonprofit sector, that's where we all want to get to, is where we are just feeling so full and so abundant that we can give, and it's not going to detract from us. We don't need anything in return. But then you put this give receive cycle in a more functional place where you give, you receive, you give, you receive, and everything's in balance. And it's a happier way to live and a more productive way to live.
Right. Yeah. And then I'm thinking from the organizational standpoint, if this part of our leaders coming as an equal and bringing that is then in them seeing their organization as an equal too. And you talk a lot about the finding your social value, which I think goes to their core competencies. It almost looked like the Eisenhower matrix to determine what it is that you are a genius at versus those things that really aren't bringing your team and your organization any, they might be overdone, right? Like you're just not, you're not getting, tasks and programs that aren't really contributing anymore and sort of are detracting from your core competencies.
Yep.
Not sure if you want to talk to that. I mean, again, you gave lots of strategies, which in the book, which I think are fantastic, lots of questions to ask.
Yeah. So one of the frameworks I use is Gay Hendricks' zones of genius. And the idea is figuring out both, again, you as an individual, and then asking your team, and you can even ask your board to do this, but it's thinking about all the tasks or all the sort of buckets of responsibilities you have in your job and putting them, each of those things, into one of four categories. So your zone of incompetence are things that you're really bad at, and so you really shouldn't be doing them. Your zone of competence is, you're reasonably good at those things, but so are a lot of other people, and so you really don't have any business doing those things. Your zone of excellence is like what you've been trained for years to do. Maybe you went to school to do it, or you've done it forever. You're just, you've gained a lot of knowledge and expertise over the years, and so you're very good at it. And then the real sweet spot is your zone of genius. And that's really what you were put on earth to do. It's your unique gift, and it's really where you should spend the bulk of your time, because you're going to find the most energy there. You're going to be the most productive there. You're going to, create the most value there. And so again, in the nonprofit sector and in the philanthropic sector, I think folks so often are just doing all the things, and they're not thinking about, well, what am I really good at, and actually what am I a genius at, and let me focus on those things and then figure out who else can help with these other things. And you can extend that to organizations as well. Like, what are we really good at? Like, what are we here to do? And then these other things, let's outsource them, or let's partner with someone else to do these things, or just not do them at all.
Right, right. It was delegating. It was about
Yes.
delegating, and that being a difficult thing to
Yeah.
do for the overgiver, right? It was like,
Yeah.
that's what
Totally.
it felt like, where is my words? Word there, I pulled your words from the book, but that was a really difficult thing for social change leaders. And why do
Yes.
you think that is? I mean, because
Yep.
of this lack mindset is
Yes.
where it's coming
It
from?
is. It is, and it's the overgiving, and it's honestly not feeling worthy. Because we as social change leaders feel like we don't have enough, and we're not worthy of getting help. It's also this inability to ask for help, this inability to say, like, I'm going to do it all. um, because I think so much in the sector, there is such a weight put on because of the overhead myth that you talked about before, and other restrictions, and then just norms that we have in the sector that says, nonprofit leaders should just do it all. Like, they shouldn't get coaching, they shouldn't get professional development. We're not going to pay for that. They don't need a big enough staff. They just don't need all these extra things that in the for-profit sector are just normal. And so there's this just setup that says nonprofit leaders shouldn't ask for help. They're not worthy of it. And so it becomes so difficult not only to delegate, but even more importantly, to ask for help, to hire enough staff, to do
Yeah.
all of those things. And the thing is, once you do that, once you have enough capacity, once you have a great team in place, once you feel free to ask for help whenever you need it, you're going to be so much more effective at achieving your mission.
Right. It's like we all need that leverage. And I guess I have a couple of friends who are executive directors, and if we sort of change to money,
Mm-hmm.
they have found that, like, investing feels really difficult for them. I honestly, I find it too, and we'll sort of transition to this money conversation. But is there, within the myths that exist in this sector, that investing is dirty? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that's the
Mm-hmm.
right word, but like, it's not accepted.
You mean investing in the organization?
Investing in the organization, if you were to get financing, I feel like
Mm-hmm. Oh,
that's
yeah.
sort of a
Yep.
no-no. Like,
Yep.
we don't do that. It's not what
Right.
nonprofits do. And
Right.
yet it
Yes.
seems to me, especially if there's excellent rates out there, that
Mm-hmm.
it gives them the leverage they need to move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Those are just a couple of the many myths and dysfunctions that happen around money in the sector. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a feeling of, well, money's dirty. If we attract too much of it or the wrong kind of it, then we're undermining our mission. And I'm not suggesting at all that organizations start, taking money from things that are opposite to their mission at
Mhm.
all. But I think there is enormous room to start seeing money as a real tool. I view it as a social change tool. It is
Mhm.
a key piece of your arsenal to create the change you seek. But I think what happens so often in the nonprofit sector is we fear it, we despise it, we don't want to talk about it, we certainly don't want to ask board members to do anything about it. It's hard to have conversations with funders. It's just a dirty, yucky kind of experience.
Mhm.
And you're not going to attract it if you're pushing it
Pushing it
away, right?
away.
It's like no one wants to be friends with you if you're, like, oh, I don't like you, you're yucky, let's not talk about you. And so instead, I'm encouraging social change leaders to really embrace it, to just
Mhm.
view money as your best friend. Like, it can do so much for you, and there's so many sort of permutations of how you can use it, that if you start to think about that, and again, if you start to open yourself up to that, more money will flow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I felt the same way this last weekend. I bought a new car. It's my first new car for really, I mean, for at least the last 10 years, but the first I bought myself with really like no input. And I debated back and forth whether or not to make this, like, do I really need it? And then when I get there to do the trade in, the car doesn't start for the guy. Like, okay, must get pushed. We moving forward. We are doing this, and
It's time.
it's time. Like, it's time. It's interesting how much it gets that we push it away. And I guess like there are lots of ways that you mentioned that we push it away as well. Sort of that we don't think of it. We're definitely would never go out and say, no, I don't need that money. But there are other ways that we should be aware of that we are pushing it away.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this happens in board meetings all the time. I see board members and staff sort of angst about money. When the money topic comes up on the agenda, you can sort of see this palpable, oftentimes you can see this palpable kind of like, oh, now we got to talk about money. That sort of happens in the room, and as opposed to an excitement like, oh, now we get to talk about money. Let's figure that out. And again, this sense of not feeling worthy of money. I kid you not, I've had clients who have the possibility of getting, for example, $1 million check, and they almost literally push it away because they say, well, I don't know how I would spend that. Like, I don't know if I would know what to do with that amount of money. So it's things like that is literally pushing money away, as opposed to really saying, well, how do we want to use, a ton of money? Like, what would that look like? And how could we really use this tool and fully tap into its power?
Right. Yeah, it's sort of what I was thinking about with rephrasing is you mentioned the example of like, how much money do we need? Oh, wait. How much
Money can
how
we
much money
raise
can we raise? Like, how much
Yeah.
money can we raise versus what do we need
to accomplish our goals?
to accomplish the goals, so that you're boundless over here,
Right.
but you're constrained on the original
Yes.
way of phrasing a very similar like the concept is the same.
Yeah. So often in again, nonprofit boardrooms, when the topic of money comes up, one of the first questions is, well, how much can we raise? And that is by definition a scarcity worldview, because you think, okay, well, there's a limit, there's a ceiling there to the money. How close can we get to that ceiling? Versus asking the question, how much do we need to accomplish our goals? Instantly puts you in the driver's seat, instantly opens you to abundance, because you say, okay, well, first of all, who cares how much we can raise? We're assuming there's endless amounts out there. Let's figure out the more important question is, how much do we need? Like, what do we want to do as an organization? What's the social change we want to create? Then what's the price tag for that? Let's go out and get that. That's right. A completely different mindset. That's going from that scarcity approach to that abundance approach.
Yeah, and so it will just start to flow. And do you find that when it flows, it pours, is like, it rains, it pours instead of like trickles in? And then does that sort of precipitate sometimes like more of the scarcity that comes out, that you sort of have to like catch yourself again, like, oh, I've actually got it not only with money, but now how am I going to staff? How am I going to like build capacity in other areas?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so you'll start to see, sometimes I do, when you can remove those scarcity blocks around money, I do see like organizations, all of a sudden funders are calling them up. You know what? I want to give you more money. I kid you not. They're like, yeah, money really starts to flow. But then if you go back to that fear, you go back to that scarcity, like the example I gave just a second ago of that ED saying, well, wait a second, $1 million, I don't even know what we would do with that. Like that fear comes back, then you're pushing it away again. You're pushing that ability to move towards your goals, to that social change you seek, you're pushing it away again. And so then it's just an opportunity to say, okay, well, why am I freaking out?
Right.
what would it really take to move this forward? How could we invest that $1 million? Let's think about that.
So it's just such an important conversation to be happening. Um, and I think even you speak about this has to happen, but giving the leaders and other staff members that you have the opportunity of time and coaching to
Mm-hmm.
have the conversations. You give lots of like self assessments, but does it sometimes help to have a third party come in and be your backbone while you're building it up, you know?
Absolutely. And honestly, that's what I do. So I'm a consultant, strategic advisor, coach, to social change leaders. And so, yes, absolutely. And I say, even in my book, I say, I, as a coach, need a coach. We
Mm-hmm.
all need help. This stuff, I'm not suggesting at all this stuff is easy. This is a huge shift from scarcity to abundance that I'm articulating. But that, again, that goes to that piece of asking for help. You have to first say, hey, yeah, I'm maybe not thinking about this the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I might be resisting money. I might be resisting abundance. I need to shift that, but I need help because I don't know how to do it.
Right,
Um,
because it's sort of ingrained.
it
It's
is. I mean,
habitual to
it is, and
feel this way.
it's part of our culture. It's part of the sector. I talk about in the
Mhm.
first chapter of the book, like, this stuff's historic. Like,
Yeah.
y'all didn't just make this up. Like, this comes from a long history of benevolent societies and how our economy was set up with the three sectors, and we've overvalued the private sector over the nonprofit sector and
Mhm.
government sector. So, I mean, it's not your fault at all. Like, this stuff goes way back. So it makes sense that you may need help to overcome it and to get to the abundance on the other side.
Right, right. And I think then it goes back really to their vision, right? Do you have
Yes.
tips that you want to impart of how someone comes to their vision
Yeah.
better, right? Because you've
Yes.
got to know where you're going, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I talk in the book about a theory of change, which I
Hmm.
think is, for any social change organization, is really fundamental. And it's really, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just the answers to 5 key strategic questions, which are: who are your target populations? So who are you seeking to benefit or influence, is number one. Second is, what's the external context? So what's going on outside your walls, that you need to be mindful of as you're charting a course. Third is the activities. So how are your core competencies employed? What is the key work that you do as an organization? Fourth, and this is where your vision comes in, short and long-term outcomes. What changed conditions do you hope will result because of your work? So how do you want the world to be different because of your work? That's your vision. And then fifth, what are your assumptions? Like, what evidence or data or assumptions do you have that this theory will actually come to fruition? So I encourage organizations to go through that exercise as a board and staff, to just simply come up with cohesive answers to those 5 questions. That becomes your guiding light. That becomes, okay, why are we doing this work? What do we want to accomplish? And from that, you can back into, then, well, how much is it going to take to do this? Right? That
Hmm.
abundance question. How much money do we need to raise to accomplish our goals? Well, your goals are your theory of change. That's what you want to achieve.
Hmm. Hmm. And I thought it was interesting you talk about in your strategies, like not really having a plan B.
Yeah, I don't believe in plan Bs.
Yeah,
I
which
really
I
don't.
was speaking to my friend about your book and was telling her, and she's like, wait, what? What about a contingency plan? I'm sorry, what if this doesn't work out? And it was like screaming at me
Yeah,
what
yeah,
everything that you're
yeah,
representing of your experience from working with these nonprofit leaders, what is going through their head?
yeah.
Why not a plan B?
Because if you create a plan B, then you are rooting your organization in scarcity, in that fear base. Because, right, a plan B is always, well, okay, this is what we really want. Plan A is what we really want. But
Hmm.
if that's not going to work out, then let's have a plan B. And by saying that's probably not going to work out, you're immediately back to scarcity, right? Because why isn't plan A going to work out? Because there's not enough. There's probably not enough money. There's probably enough power. There's just not enough. And so when you create a plan B, you are immediately saying, plan A is not going to happen. Let's go back to plan B. And so the whole organization's focus, resources, everything are back into scarcity. But what I'm not arguing is to ignore fear. Fear is very real, and it can be very destructive. So when those fears come up, when the board says, we need a plan B. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Like, what are we afraid of? Well, there's not going to be enough money. Okay, why do you think there's not going to be enough money? Well, because we don't have blah, blah, blah. Oh, we don't have blah, blah, blah yet, but let's figure out what we can do to get whatever that is, right?
Right. I love watching you. You're very excited when you talk about it because, yeah, you can see it just pouring out of you, and it's super inspiring. Um, yeah, I mean, if you could have a few moments with every nonprofit leader all at once, what do you want to give them?
Yeah. So first of all, I would just want to say thank you. Thank you for hanging in there over these many years. And I think particularly the last 4 years have been awful, been really, really hard for everybody. I would say, I think, where our country is right now is really, it's hard to watch.
Tough place.
But particularly for the nonprofit sector has been hit by, so many whammies, right? Decreasing funding, increased need for services, right? It's just like, boom. And so, first of all, I would just say, thanks for hanging in there and for continuing to do the work and to continuing to believe in your mission and vision for a better world. Because where would we all be if we didn't have these folks out there that are just tireless? Like they just go in every day, no matter what's happening. We're going to do this work. We got it. Who else is going to do this work? We've got to do it. So that's amazing. But then the other thing I would say is it doesn't have to be so hard. There is an easier way. I promise you there's an easier way. I've seen it so many times, not only in my own personal life, but with my clients. And so there's hope out there. So it's been hard. It's been awful. Thank you so much. But there is more to this, and you can be more joyful and more effortless and more abundant in your work.
Right. I was going to say that sort of circles us right back around to the beginning. Well, so your book is Reinventing Social Change. Where can people find it?
Yeah, it's available at all the retailers right now for pre-order, and books will be arriving February 9th. But the easiest thing is just to go to my book page, so socialvelocity.net/book. And you'll see all the links, all the places you can order. And then I also have a lot of pre-order incentives for folks as well.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sticking around maybe just for a few minutes with me as we close up.
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you so much for having this time with me.
Yeah,
I
it was
really
wonderful.
appreciate it.
I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.